Charles Leclerc stuns McLaren for pole position at the Hungarian Grand Prix as Red Bull's struggles worsen, whilst Lewis Hamilton suffers yet another early qualifying exit. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. And Ian, where do we begin? We wanted some chaos for the last qualifying before the summer break. We had, I think, plenty of chaos, to say the least. We had Yuki Tsunoda out in Q1, Lewis and Kimi Antonelli out in Q2 with a sprinkling of rain as well during that session. Max Verstappen in 8th, the two Aston Martins flying.
Yep.
But I think it's only fair we start with the most confused driver at the Hungaroring. Our pole sitter Charles Leclerc pointed out he has absolutely no idea what's happening in Formula One, not a clue in the slightest. How on earth, Ian, did he defeat the McLarens, who looked, up until Q3, unstoppable all weekend?
You've hit the nail on the head. How on earth did that happen? It was, to cut a long story short, it was quite a dramatic change in wind direction specifically. And it threw everybody a loop in the top 10 shootout, with the exception, as you say, of Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc was the only driver who improved in Q3 on his Q2 time. Every other driver was slower. The two McLarens, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, roughly around 0.4, 0.5 of a second slower, respectively. George Russell starts 4th, 0.2 of a second slower. Fernando Alonso starts 5th. He was 0.2 of a second slower. Only Charles managed to conjure a lap. Basically, climatic conditions changed quite considerably in Q3. It was much cooler. As I say, the wind in particular changed direction through turns 13 and 14, which are actually just behind me over here, funnily enough. And as I say, it threw everybody a loop. George Russell in particular mentioned that he lost 0.3 of a second in particular through turn 14. He finished 0.052 seconds adrift in fourth of Charles Leclerc. But as George pointed out, pretty much every driver that took part in that Q3 session has a case for arguing, well, but for this, but for that, I could have been on pole position. Nevertheless, it was Charles Leclerc that managed to nail that better lap in Q3 compared to the one in Q2. That's how we did it, folks.
Yeah, although with some rain forecast for Sunday and Leclerc confirming he had a low downforce setup, he faces potentially a very tricky Sunday if it does rain as much as has been reported by some outlets. It looks like there could be quite a bit of rain on the horizon for Sunday. But on Saturday, of course, Dreamland for Leclerc's side of the garage. A horror show on Hamilton's. He came out, we've spoken this season, a bit of a theme of self-critical quotes about Lando, about Kimi. Lewis has taken that to another level, pointing out, and I quote, "I'm useless, absolutely useless," said that Ferrari needs a new driver. I mean, this is a track he is so successful at. 8 wins, 9 pole positions, starts in 12th. It's just from bad to worse after, in Belgium, with the, exception of the recovery on the Sunday.
Back-to-back exits. Early exits for Lewis Hamilton, not making Q3. And this is the first time on pure pace he's not made around this circuit that he's not made it into the top 10. So that gives you some idea as to just how bad a performance this has been for Lewis Hamilton. His worst qualifying performance, as I say, on pure pace around this circuit. So real difficult place for Lewis. Those quotes that you mentioned there, Nick, "I'm useless, absolutely useless, Ferrari needs a new driver," they were to Sky Sports F1. When he came to us, it was like trying to pull teeth out of Lewis. He did not want to know. He mumbled his way through the first few questions and basically was asked one of the question about Charles Leclerc, and actually highlighted the fact that what a great job Charles had done and how great that was for the team. But anything around himself, didn't want to know. He was swiftly out of there in about 1 minute flat, which was about the same time actually that his lap took around this circuit, pretty much around the same time. So that gives you some idea as to how annoyed and frustrated Lewis was with his performance today. He really is struggling at the moment. Will Ferrari consider a new driver? Yeah. Shall we go down that speculative route for 2026? Could Lewis all of a sudden decide to quit if things don't improve? I don't think so. bottom line, Lewis is naturally a fighter. And as I say, given the regulation change for next season, you would hope that the car lends itself more to the way Lewis likes a car, even though that car is going to be considerably different, of course. It's going to be relying a lot more on electrical energy. So that's something else he's got to learn for next season. But the car itself, it's going to, at least it's not going to have the ground effect performance that we've had over these past 3.5 years so far. The car will have a higher ride height. So hang in there, Lewis. All is not lost. Give it 2026, mate, and then see where you're at. And then maybe Ferrari just might need another driver, as you're indicating.
Well, if Spa last weekend, particularly the race day, is anything to go by, the mixed conditions tomorrow, if it does play out as expected, as I've mentioned, could play into Lewis's favour. Only time will tell how to get in already. Let's go, though.
Too early. Come on.
Too early.
People waiting, mate. Come on.
I'm sorry. I take it back. All right, let's go, though. Back to the front of the field, because it is, of course, Charles Leclerc on pole, ahead of Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris. And interesting quotes from Andrea Stella about the McLaren drivers, pointing out they paid the price with, of course, the change in wind condition, the wind direction changing, the fact that they played it cautious because you didn't know what was going to happen from corner to corner. But more interesting, and linking to the weather, Andrea recognises that with the amount of rain forecast, particularly for Sunday morning and ahead of the Grand Prix in the early afternoon, it does make their situation and getting past Leclerc much more complex.
Yeah, Andrea Stella has turned around and said that tomorrow the situation could be a lot more complex should the weather forecast prove to be accurate. As you say, Nick, rain is due to strike at some stage over the Hungaroring. We're not quite sure when. Forecasts are varying at the moment as to when that rain might hit, but nevertheless, we could get a definite change in climatic conditions as we saw in Q3. Not quite as dramatic as might unfold for the race itself, but nevertheless, as I say, those Q3 conditions did play quite a role in the effect on the two McLaren cars in particular, because up until that point, they'd absolutely dominated this weekend. 1 and 2 in all 3 practice sessions, 1 and 2 in Q1 and Q2. And then, as I say, Q3, complete change. McLaren off the pace. Andrea Stella also said that his drivers played it a little bit cautious. So that also played into the fact that Charles Leclerc got that magnificent pole, as we talked about earlier.
We've, of course, got to discuss Red Bull because, I mean, Max Verstappen in 8th, which actually, whilst might sound bad, given their struggles this weekend, is actually quite a good result. He was outside the top 10 in FP2 and FP3. Yuki Tsunoda, bless him, for the 4th time in the last 8 races, out in Q1. But, I feel for Yuki. He was just over a 10th and a half slower than Max in Q1. Max was 11th, Yuki was 16th. Just shows the fine margins in that first part of qualifying. But Max in particular coming out with some really punchy quotes in the media pen after qualifying, pointing out that Red Bull's biggest problem this weekend is that no matter what they do, they've made so many changes, nothing works. It does not bode well for Sunday.
That was a great quote, and that's an actual quote from Max. Nothing works. Basically, Max said that they were just going around in circles, and no matter what they did, nothing will have an effect on that car. Real struggles. It reminded me a little bit of Max post-Italian Grand Prix last year, when he really turned on the performance of his Red Bull back then. And this felt very similar, not quite as dramatic back then, not as the quotes were strong, but the way he delivered the quotes were not as forceful as they were back in Monza last year. But nevertheless, yes, not a happy bunny at all. Faces a real uphill battle now for the Grand Prix. And the one thing he doesn't want, that you perhaps might have expected Max would be a bit of rain to help him. But the reason he doesn't want that is basically he's turned around and said he's got no grip with that car whatsoever. So if that's the case, the last thing, as Max said, he needs is rain, because if he's got no grip, that's just going to make it even worse for him. Because even during practice on Friday, he turned around and said that with that RB21, it's like driving on ice. So driving on ice on a dry track, what's it going to be like driving that car on a wet track? That proved to be the case in the Grand Prix on Sunday.
Well, tune in on Sunday to find out. To quickly run through the top 10 from qualifying, it was Charles Leclerc who claimed pole position, ahead of Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris in 3rd, George Russell in 4th, Fernando Alonso in 5th, Lance Stroll in 6th, awesome performances by the duo. Gabriel Bortoleto in an equally awesome 7th for Stake, Verstappen in 8th, Liam Lawson, should I say, in 9th, and Isaac Hadjar in 10th. Ian, very finally, is it 2023? Because Aston Martin are up at the sharp end.
It's like, what a difference a week. What a difference a week makes. She could not get a more dramatic turnaround than we've seen over these past 7 days. Think back to qualifying last week at the Belgian Grand Prix. Lars and Fernando were on the back row. They were 19th and 20th, the worst qualifying performance we've seen from Aston Martin. And then, as you say, fast forward 7 days, and all of a sudden, these guys are flying around this circuit. In fairness to both Fernando and Lance, they both turned around and said that this car is really played, or the circuit has really played to the strengths of the car. So that's basically why they're in such a good position. The most fun, Lance turned around and said that he's had in that car for quite some time. So that gives you some idea. And whatever ailment Fernando Alonso has got going on in his back right now, bearing in mind that was the reason why he missed FP1 on Friday with Felipe Drugovich standing in for him. Well, that's quite clearly been forgotten because Fernando was certainly a happy chap in the pen post-qualifying.
On the topic of Aston Martin, if you'd like to win one of 2 Aston Martin caps, well, Racing News 365 are doing a giveaway. All you've got to do to be in the chance of winning one of the 2 caps is be subscribed to this channel and comment below any video, but please just do this one for ease for you. I want to win. It is as simple as that, but please do in addition, smash the like button and subscribe to the channel just if you enjoy our videos. Ian, amazing stuff as always. You can join Ian and I post-race on Sunday. Will it rain? Time will tell. See you later.
Let's hope we don't get a repeat of what happened in Spa last week when we had a safety car for 4 laps throwing round. Anyway, folks, tune in. Should be fun. Take care as always.